Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affair explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we will try to assess the concept of universal health coverage and the universal immunization program. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to assess the recent directive which has been given by the Commission for Air Quality Management, where they have imposed a stricter particulate matter emission limit. Then, we are also going to take up 5 topics from the perspective of the upcoming prelims examination, where we will provide much important value addition and cover the topics in the holistic manner possible to actually be reflected in the prelims examination 2026. So, stay tuned. The article today showcases the improvements which has been achieved by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in the field of immunization and the impediments which still persist and thus kind of block the idea of achieving universal health coverage, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of health and governance. So the first question which shall arise in your mind shall be that does there exist any historical precedent to the existence of such vaccine in our ancient India? The answer is a very interesting yes and no at the same point of time. So for example, the Charak Samhita, which basically dates back to 6th century BC, so it was being written in the contemporary period of the development of Mahajanpadas. It basically mentions certain ingredients which can actually be utilized to boost your ojas or immunity. However, it does not specifically anywhere mention any kind of vaccine. So a follow-up question can be, what are vaccines? It is basically a process of utilizing various kind of microorganisms or inactivated pathogens or genetic materials like for example messenger RNA to actually create antigen. Antigen which is basically going to fight with the pathogen which was going to impact our body and thus kind of have a detrimental impact on our health. The first mention of such preventive inoculation in writing actually comes from 16th century CE in the region of China, where they have described certain treatment procedures for smallpox. However, the first evidence of development of such vaccine to treat smallpox was actually developed in the year of 1796 by a person named as Edward Jenner. Keep this in mind that such vaccines which are being developed in the scientific lab actually requires long gestation period, large scale capital investment as well as a long research procedure of trial and error, and thus it ultimately transitions to large scale mass production. Thus, it approximately took 57 years for the development of the first smallpox vaccine, which actually started being produced at a large mass scale, and it was actually made mandatory in UK in the year of 1853. Then, in the year of 1885, there came a Frenchman, Louis Pasteur, who actually developed the first live virus vaccine to actually treat rabies. Then, you guys can recall from your modern history lecture that how in the year of 1897 there was a bubonic plague which has engulfed the region of Pune, Maharashtra, and how for that purpose there was an appointment of a Rand Commission whose chairman W.C. Rand was actually executed by the Chapekar brothers because of the kind of the negligence towards the health of the people as well as the number of atrocities which they had committed in the time period of this plague in the region of Pune. In the very same year, 1897, there was Valdemar Haffkine who actually developed a vaccine for the cholera. In 1922, further vaccines were developed to actually treat tuberculosis, diphtheria, tetanus, etc. And in 1944, the first vaccine against the flu was developed. The first genetically engineered vaccine was actually made for hepatitis B and the year was 1986. So with the establishment of the World Health Organization in the year of 1948 on a specific date of 7th of April, the idea of universal health coverage to actually create such large scale vaccination to treat large amount of disease and thus focus on the preventive healthcare rather than curative healthcare, that actually came into prominence. Keep two things in your mind from the prelims perspective. First, the 7th April is also celebrated as World Health Day, and World Health Organization is a specialized United Nations agency which is headquartered at Geneva, Switzerland. So this concept, which was being discussed at a lot of international forums, the universal health coverage, led to the signing of Alma Ata Declaration of 1978, where it basically propagated the idea of health for all. And it also reaffirmed that how strengthening of the primary health care centers are sine qua non or prerequisite to actually achieve this idea of vaccination. Thus, on this line, they actually set up a target to provide such universal health coverage to each and every people across the world by the year of 2000. Just by having a look at the number of people who are suffering from various diseases, just like how Gautam Buddha did at one point of time, you guys can also assess that this idea of Alma Ata Declaration of 1978 has not come into fruition. Thus, when the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were being designed to be achieved by the year of 2030, there was an inclusion of a specific goal, that is the goal number 3.8.1, which now aims to provide essential health services to all the people across the world by the year of 2030. And in this direction, there also has been signing of a global action plan or GAP for healthy lives and well-being for all by the year of 2019. To actually achieve this idea of universal health coverage, to provide such large-scale immunization to people, and to actually focus on the preventive healthcare concept, the World Health Organization has launched expanded program on immunization, where it actually puts impetus on the increased coverage of three bacterial diseases: diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. And keep this in mind that coverage for such bacterial disease and various other diseases which are actually preventable from the vaccine uses, the coverage has been increased from being a meager 5% of the population in the year of 1974 to approximately 85% by the year of 2024. If you will actually visit the World Health Organization's website, they also basically showcases the achievements under this expanded program on immunization. That how smallpox has actually been eradicated from the world by the year of 1980. The journey which started from the year of 1796 when Edward Jenner actually developed the first smallpox vaccine. Or how in the case of polio, the World Health Organization has been able to achieve almost 99% polio eradication. Right now, it is endemic only in two countries, and that is Pakistan and Afghanistan. Or the kind of the joint efforts where a lot of countries actually put a lot of resources, a lot of joint research programs, and developed a lot of vaccines under the global vaccination efforts for COVID-19. In this direction, following the idea of Vasudev Kutumbakam, our country also basically launched an initiative that is Vaccine Matri, where we actually delivered COVID vaccines to almost 95 countries at that point of time. Also, to actually further expand the coverage of immunization, the World Health Organization has actually come up with the Immunization Agenda of 2030. Read the points very carefully from the perspective of prelims. First, the idea is to reduce by 50% the number of children who are missing out on all the vaccine. Second, to actually achieve 90% coverage for essential vaccines which are actually given in the childhood and the adolescence. And then to actually introduce 500 new vaccines in the low and middle income countries. Following the template of this expanded program on immunization by the World Health Organization, our country basically designed the Universal Immunization Program. So first, when it was launched in the year of 1978, the name was Expanded Program on Immunization, borrowing the idea of World Health Organization as well as following the template set by the W Health Organization's Alma Ata Declaration. However, at that point of time, it was limited only in the urban areas. By the year of 1985, it was renamed as Universal Immunization Program, where the expansion of this immunization coverage was now extended to the rural areas as well. Keep this in mind that this Universal Immunization Program being implemented by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is an entirely central sector scheme. Now some of you may will argue that sir, but the healthcare or the public health is a state subject. We are basically referring to the 7th schedule now. we have learned all the items in the union list, state list and concurrent list. The entry 6 of the state list actually deals with public health. So how such program, which is actually dealing with such large scale immunization program and thus actually following the directive principle of state policy article 47, which direct the state to improve the public health care, then how this program can be entirely centrally funded? The answer to that is entry 29 of the concurrent list, which actually directs the power to the central government as well to prevent such contagious diseases from one state to another, under which the government under this universal immunization program basically provides the vaccine for almost 12 vaccine preventable disease at no cost at all. 11 are actually available at the national level, like for example diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, polio, measles, rubella, rotavirus, hepatitis B, meningitis, various kind of tuberculosis or pneumonia which is caused by influenza type B. Then, for one specific vaccine preventable disease, the vaccines are available at the endemic district of various states. Like for example, the disease is Japanese encephalitis, and for that purpose, the vaccines are provided in those districts and in those states where this particular disease prevails or is spread in large number. For example, the northern states like UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, or for example the southern state belt of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, or for example the northeastern states like Assam, Manipur and Meghalaya. Thus, if you will actually refer to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare's website, they basically say that how under this universal immunization program, which has been further strengthened under the Indradhanush framework which was launched in 2014, they are basically targeting 3 crore plus pregnant women and 2.7 crore plus newborns annually. And if you will actually refer to the Economic Survey 2026, it is all in the praise of the efforts of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And for that purpose, it actually showcases a lot of data. It tells us that how India's maternal mortality rate, which is defined as the number of maternal deaths during a given time period per 1 lakh live birth, has actually declined to 93. And from the year of 1990, in the last 3 decades, we have actually registered a decline of almost 86%. Then there exists a 76% decline in the under 5 mortality rate as well. Under 5 mortality rate, which refers to the probability a newborn would die before reaching exactly 5 years of age, expressed per 1000 live birth and not 1 lakh. Here also, the global decline in the last 3 decades was 61%, while we have registered a higher 78% decline. When it comes to the infant mortality rate, there is only 25 per 1000 live birth, which is actually taking place right now, which was actually 40 in 2030. Then there has been a 70% decline in the neonatal mortality rate, 54% globally. So even here our average is much higher, which was actually registered or achieved globally. What is neonatal mortality rate? It is basically defined as the number of deaths during the first 28 completed days of life per 1000 live birth. So keep this in mind that if we'll talk about the children, the base year will always be 1000 live birth. However, if we talk about the maternal mortality rate, there actually the base year or base number is taken as 1 lakh live birth. Take. The same economic survey also gives you a specific table about the UWin portal, which is a user-friendly platform that actually enables seamless access to immunization records, flexible scheduling and anytime access and anywhere vaccination. According to which, there has been more than 14 crore plus registered beneficiaries and almost 1.62 crore institutional deliveries has been achieved, with vaccination doses administered to approximately 60 crore people. All of this data can actually kind of substantiate your points in your mains answer. However, there are small counter arguments as well from the economic survey. It says that how there are certain states which actually have a very high maternal mortality rate which still prevails in the year of 2026. For example, Madhya Pradesh, where it is approximately 175. So out of 1 lakh women who are actually giving birth to the demographic dividend of the future, 175 of them actually ends up dying while giving the birth to the next generation. or how 75% of the pregnant and lactating mothers have insufficient calorie and protein intake. So keep this in mind that even after achieving all of these salient features and salient achievements, there are still certain persisting challenges. What are the challenges? Let's try to assess them in the number first. So as per the UNICEF's State of World Children Report of 2024, childhood immunization in our country has actually declined for the first time in the decade. However, we can also counter argue here that because our total fertility rate is also declining, now there are less number of children who are being born per the average size of family. So maybe that is the reason. Second, as per the World Health Organization, India now has 1.6 million zero-dose children in 2023. So approximately there still exists 16 lakh people who did not got any kind of immunization at all. And if we refer to the National Family Health Survey 5, only 76% children were fully immunized. So there are a lot of children who have not got the complete cycle of vaccination doses. Why such challenges persist? Let's try to assess now the underlying factors for them. So first and foremost, the UNDP report of 2024, it actually first and foremost applauds our country's vaccination efforts and immunization efforts. It says that how 93% immunization coverage has been achieved by India. What does this number implies? So let's say there are 100 children and women who actually falls in the eligible cycle for the vaccination doses. We have actually ended up providing or completing the entire vaccination cycle for them for almost 93 out of them. So that is indeed a commendable effort. But the same report also highlighted the persisting challenge of local inequalities, where there still exist small pockets with low coverage. So it highlights that how out of the remaining 7% population, majority of them actually comes from the marginalized communities. Like for example, they belong to scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, or they are basically the migrant families who are basically migrating from the underdeveloped rural region in the search of job to the urban areas. Or for example, these are basically those factories which are families which are actually living in extreme poverty. So if we corroborate this 7% missing people from the vaccination list and corroborate this data with the Economic Survey 2026, which actually tells us that how 5.3% of our country's current population still lives in extreme poverty. So, which is a person who is actually considered to be extremely poor? The Economic Survey 2026 refers to the World Bank definition, according to which if there exists a person who is actually earning less than $3 per day, then that person is actually considered to be extremely poor. So with the current currency exchange, it will fall approximately to 270 rupees per day. If you are earning less than this, like me for example, then you will fall in the extreme poor category. It's very obvious that such people who are living in this extreme poverty, they do not have adequate resources to actually access such vaccination cycle, or they might not be living in the vicinity of such sound health infrastructure. That can be one very important reason. Or they might not be having actually a good health education to make them aware about the kind of the benefits which vaccines provide, leading to the vaccine hesitancy. This is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the complacency which actually prevails in the population. So in this context, just recall the kind of the number of good hygiene and sanitation practices which we very quickly adopted during the time period of the COVID, and how quickly we have discarded them altogether as well. This has been termed by the health experts as the short-term memory effect, where there is a large scale population which do not complete their entire vaccine doses cycle and thus end up paying high out of pocket expenditure on preventive healthcare or on curative healthcare instead of actually focusing on preventive healthcare through the cycle of vaccination. For example, for this also we can actually take the World Health Organization data itself. It tells us that how Indian families, they actually pay 30 to 40% of their total health expenditure from their own pocket. how such large scale out of pocket expenditure actually ends up kind of pushing 60% of such marginalized families into the basket of poverty. Then in our country, there exists the poor state of primary healthcare infrastructure. For which purpose we can actually refer to the data which was provided to us by the Rural Health Statistic 21 published in the year of 2023. Just look at the government healthcare centers shortfall which prevails. If there is a necessity of, let's say, 25,000 rural primary health centers, there is actually a shortage of more than 1,000. Or if there is a need of 21,900 rural community health center, there is almost a shortfall of 17,000 such community health centers. Keep this in mind that the kind of the doses or the vaccine doses which we are discussing, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, rotavirus, these vaccine doses are available in these community health centers. So if there exists such a large scale shortage of infrastructure, don't you think that the vaccines will not be able to reach to the people at the first place? Then let's say such infrastructure actually exists in the form of bricks. Then there exists 67% sanction post of specialist at the community healthcare centers in our country actually lies vacant. Just look at the large scale vacancy which prevails across the dynamics of the healthcare when it comes to our country. So don't you think that the Alma Ata Declaration's idea that how there shall be more impetus on primary health care, that actually stands jeopardized in our country? Then, if we refer to the very recent data which was actually published in the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, it told us that in the time period of 2025 to 2026, if we take one financial year, the total investment which came from the private sector, private capital investment or private equity in the health sector of our country, it was a meager $5.3 billion. So the kind of the investment which is being made by the government, it is not having a kind of an equal crowding in effect from the private share. At the same point of time, don't you think our government is also trying to follow the fiscal consolidation path? So obviously the kind of the share of the government is actually going to decline in the long run. Next, the low capacity building at the grassroots level. So who actually provides this vaccine to the children and the women at the grassroots level? The Anganwadi workers, the ASHA workers, who are actually paid meager salaries. They do not have any social security coverage. Even during the COVID pandemic time period, they actually face something called as, kind of the driver of the disease syndrome, the kind of the taboos which are associated with them, leading to further vaccine hesitancy or complacency. So what can be the ideal way forward in front of us? First and foremost is to actually expand the components of Indradhanush and actually include such mandatory vaccination, how it was made mandatory in the region of UK in year of 1853 itself, to actually make it mandatory under the different schemes, health schemes of the government of India, such as for example Janani Suraksha Yojana as well as Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana or Ayushman Bharat scheme. The second is that first and foremost, many of the people have actually complained about the kind of the after effect which they faced after the COVID-19 vaccine. So there shall be a research based recommendation. There shall be a kind of a detailed research and a lot of trial and error, and then only such vaccines shall be brought to be actually made available to the public. Then from our National Education Policy 2020 itself, following the model which is actually followed in the Finland and Norway, where the children from the very school age, they are actually made aware about the preventive healthcare. And from the very childhood, that how such vaccination, how taking care of your health, how actually maintaining a good body mass index, how not to actually eat a lot of fast food, adulterated food. So we can actually start doing social engineering from the grassroots level. Then for the faster development of such vaccination, don't you think we can actually use artificial intelligence and machine learning? In this case, just recall the AlphaFold of Google, how they have actually, kind of developed a whole genomic structure by doing the protein analysis of, kind of million of people. So we can also create such database, also use such artificial intelligence and machine learning for the faster development of vaccine. And then we also need to provide an essential program on immunization with equal funding coming from the private as well as the public share. One good news coming in this direction of immunization is that how very recently our health minister actually launched the indigenously manufactured tetanus and diphtheria vaccine at the Central Research Institute in Kasauli, Himachal Pradesh. The launch, which marks a significant step towards safeguarding the national health security and also strengthening our country's public health infrastructure. So I think a kind of a hint for your conclusion has been provided, and with this we move to the next news, where the Commission for Air Quality Management in NCR, National Capital Region, and the adjoining areas has actually imposed a stricter particulate matter emission limit on the industries to actually curb the menace of air pollution, forming an important component of the environment conservation. I completely understand that air pollution is a kind of a repeated topic. But here there is a new directive, first and foremost, which has been given to us by the Center for Air Quality Management. Second is that we are also going to actually learn that how the thermal power plants and the various manufacturing units in this particular region are actually much more responsible for the cause of this air pollution, and how they are completely not adhering to the guidelines given by the government time and again. So first and foremost, what are the new directives? The Commission for Air Quality Management in the region of NCR and adjoining areas, they actually propose a stricter particulate matter emission limit, where they said that from earlier it was approximately 80 microgram per meter cube standard, which was actually notified in the June 2022. Now they have actually brought it down to 50 milligram per normal cubic meter for industries across Delhi NCR. Keep this in mind that it is in the resonance with the kind of the limit which has been set by the World Health Organization. And as per the Commission for Air Quality Management in NCR, they actually kind of refer to the research which was conducted by the IIT Kanpur, and they said that this is very easily possible and can be done by the industries. So, the question which shall arise in your mind is, why there exists such an urgent call for structural reforms? This is where the terming of Delhi as pollution capital by various newspaper articles actually come into the foreplay. The World Health Organization report 2024 actually termed our country or our nation as the third most polluted country, where the Delhi was actually identified as the world's most polluted capital city, according to which 96% of the population of the National Capital Territory is actually exposed to the high level of particulate matter 2.5, which actually can be inhaled or goes inside our organs and leads to various kind of cardiovascular diseases, can actually impact our central nervous system and significantly impact our lungs as well. Also, the Lancet report of 2023, it actually suggested that how, let's say if there are 100 deaths which are taking place in the region of Delhi, 11 out of them are actually caused by a single source, and that is air pollution. Just refer the extent of air pollution in our country. So as per the World Health Organization's WHO's 24-hour guideline which exists for particulate matter of size 10 is 50 microgram per meter cube. However, the National Capital Territory's reading was already 16 times higher in the months of December at that point of time, showing how the high pollution levels actually surged before the various festivals night. So there are different causes of pollution in Delhi which exist, and if such question is asked, right, for even for the entire country, you guys can actually use these maps directly in your answer, right? Just look how the air pollution is impacting the Red Fort walls, how the stubble burning is actually considered to be one of the reasons, and how Delhi is the world's most polluted capital city again, with India having the third worst air quality out of 134 countries. The first reason which most oftenly makes in the news is the stubble burning. So when the Kharif season actually starts getting over, the harvest is done, the farmers of the Green Revolution region, the Punjab, the Haryana, the Rajasthan, the Western UP, they actually start burning the remaining organic matter for the field to be get ready for the next cropping cycle of the Rabi crop. So the emission which actually takes place from this stubble burning, the emission which is actually also coming from the various kind of vehicles and industries, or the various kind of pollutants which are actually prevailing in the region, all of them are actually driven towards the region of Delhi thanks to this northwesterly winds or the jet streams which start emerging from the region of Caspian Sea and start blowing in the direction from west to east. Also, while they are actually traveling to the Delhi, they also basically ends up accumulating the dust from the Gulf as well. And as there is a withdrawal of monsoon which is taking place at the same point of time, so there is a kind of a large scale vacant area which is here, right? So the air pressure is very low here in comparison to the high pressure area region which is actually prevailing in the region of west. So the air will start following the simple law. It will start basically flowing from the high pressure area to low pressure area. One is that issue. The second is the topography of Delhi. So this kind of the pollutants which has now kind of concentrated in the region of Delhi, they could have dispersed to the neighboring regions also. But Delhi basically act as a kind of a blocked region. Why? It is basically kind of sheltered in the north by the Himalayas, in the west by Thar Desert and Aravallis, in the south by the Central Plateau, Vindhya and Satpura range. So it basically acts as a kind of a landlocked region. There is also absence of any sea breeze who can actually disperse these pollutant materials. Then also need to understand that there exists another reason, the third major cause, and that is the temperature inversion. So in the normal circumstances, what shall happen? Let's say for example there is sun. The solar radiation, it shall start hitting the small particulate matters, right, the air particles which are basically present at the ground level. So they will start basically getting heated up. All these photon particles are basically colliding with each other, and thus the large amount of energy is being produced right above the ground level. So because of this kind of the large scale production of energy which is taking place just right above the ground level, don't you think they will basically start rising up, right? So that's the basic concept. When the air basically gets warm, it starts rising up, and thus when the warm air is rising, and let's say in the time period of the cold, the cold climate which prevails from the time period of October to January and February, there exists absence of any cloud cover as well as clear and winter nights takes place or prevails. So this basically warm air, they start rising up, and thus the hot air starts getting accumulated at the upper troposphere region. So basically, let's say that here the temperature is 25 degrees Celsius, and here because the warm air has been completely uplifted from the ground, at the ground level, lower troposphere, there basically takes place 20 degrees Celsius temperature. So obviously again the cold air, right, basically the kind of the air, because here there is a large scale prevailing of the low temperature, the air will start basically coming here to fill this, and thus takes place the temperature inversion, where now here there exists a kind of a cold temperature and here there exists a kind of a hot temperature. So basically the temperature inversion has taken place, and now this cold air, because it is heavy, it will basically start subsiding down instead of rising above, and thus all the particulate matters from vehicle, factories, construction, stubble burning, they actually kind of get stuck here. They are not dispersed to the upper troposphere, and thus it impacts the people living here much more, the flora and the fauna as well. Then there are several other reasons: expansion of grey infrastructure, the absence of green-blue spaces, the large-scale urbanization, and the land use changes thanks to the anthropogenic pressure which is taking place. But a recent research was actually conducted in the Hindu, which basically showcased that how 10 to 12% of the total Delhi's pollutants or Delhi's pollution level is actually responsible or is actually driven from the kind of the emission which takes place from various thermal power plants first of all, and the second from the chimneys of the various manufacturing industries which actually use coal as a kind of a power source or fossil fuels as a power source. So let's try to understand this aspect as well, a kind of a very the aspect which is right in the front of our eyes but is very neglected one as well. So just look here, let's say there is a thermal power plant or any factory who is basically using fossil fuels to actually generate electricity. So there is a smoke rising from that. Automobiles who are using these fossil fuels like diesel and petrol, the various crop residue, the burning of organic matter, all of this basically first and foremost produces various kind of primary pollutants. Carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, volcanic organic compounds, lead, and your particulate matter like 2.5 and 10. Then these primary pollutants, they actually climb into the atmosphere and start reacting with other gases which are present there or water vapor and in the atmosphere to actually form more complex particles which are termed as secondary pollutants. Your sulfuric and nitric acid, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, peroxyacyl nitrates or PAN. So if we refer to the research by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, it basically tells us that how this reaction between sulfur dioxide and ammonia, that is NH3, is actually responsible for 1/3 or 33% of the particulate matter of the size 2.5. The total nationwide concentration of the ammonium sulfate is approximately 11.9 microgram per meter cube, which is actually responsible for 34% of the particulate matter 2.5 mass. And the main driver is sulfur dioxide, which actually ends up producing 60% from the these kind of the thermal power plants who are using these fossil fuels. This sulfur dioxide, which is a toxic gas with pungent smell, it actually combines with ammonia NH3 and then produces PM 2.5. So you guys are like, sir, हाँ ठीक है. Why there is so much worry? Because keep this in mind that India produces approximately 24% of the total sulfur dioxide emission. We are the world's top emitter. And these thermal power plants actually emit 240 times greater SO2 than stubble burning. So while our focus is entirely on these headline news like stubble burning, there are these thermal power plants which are basically within the vicinity of the Delhi NCR region, as well as the various manufacturing industries who are running on fossil fuels to actually produce electricity. They are the major culprit. Almost 11 such thermal power plants and manufacturing industries who use fossil fuels are responsible for approximately 20% of the Delhi's air pollution. So you guys are like that, okay sir, is our government sleeping on that? Nahi. The Ministry of Power actually came up with thermal power plant policy of 2015, where it said that in our country there exist 537 thermal power plants. Take all of them has to install this flue gas desulfurization at the exhaust of their chimneys. Let's try to understand this. What is this flue gas desulfurization? So let's say there is a flue gas which is being released from the exhaust, right, from the chimneys of these industries. Take flue gas is basically any gas which is basically released from the burning of the fossil fuels. Take. So the moment it actually enters into this FGD unit which has been installed at the exhaust itself, there takes place a demister. The demister first and foremost starts sprinkling water on this gas, and thus the kind of the heavy pollutant materials like for example sulfur dioxide elements, they actually starts settling down in this kind of a dissolvent or absolvent which has been kept there, which basically consists of limestone curry, gypsum, oxidizing gas, etc. And thus it basically start absorbing these SO2 particles, and thus they are not released in the atmosphere, and thus the gas which comes out is a clean gas. So it will not mix with ammonia and will not produce further particulate matter 2.5. So we can actually end up reducing almost 33% of it in the atmosphere. That is the idea. The Center for Electricity and Authority also made a calculation. It said that if we install these FGD units across these thermal power plants, then we can actually end up reducing 95% of the SO2 emission. That was the idea. So we basically categorize these thermal power plants into three categories. First, those thermal power plants who are within 10-kilometer radius of NCR or cities with a million plus population. They were given a kind of a deadline that by the date of 31st of December 2024, keep this in mind, you shall install all of these FGD units. Category B, within 10-kilometer radius of any critically polluted areas or non-attainment cities. They were given a deadline of 2026. Category C, all the remaining plants throughout the country. They were given a deadline of 2027. Let's say there is a particular company called as TO, who falls in the category A. And this particular company has not installed flue gas desulfurization unit by the date of 31st of December 2024, then if that company has not installed up to 6 months, then that company will be charged 0.2 rupees per unit of generation. If that company has not installed for 1 year, then 0.3 rupees per unit. And if there is a delay which takes place beyond 1 year, then approximately 0.4 per unit. You guys might be thinking that, sir, these are such meager and abysmal amounts. What impact it will have on such industries like TO? I will tell you. Let's say there is a thermal power plant who is producing more than 500 megawatt of electricity and has not installed such flue gas desulfurization unit on all of their exhaust, and the time period has gone more than 1 year, then every year approximately that company will end up paying 80 crore rupees, right? So that is going to be, have a kind of a huge impact on their balance sheet. So now you guys will be like that, okay sir, all of these companies might be scared now and all of them might have installed also FGD units. Nahi. As per the recent Hindu report, only 39 out of these 537 thermal power plants actually ended up installing these FGD units. That is a meager 8%. Thick. Why? Long gestation period to actually install these. Actually long, kind of a large scale capital investment which is required. At the same point of time, the companies which have actually installed also, they have added this cost in the electricity unit itself. So basically, now the government, when it actually realized that it is going to be, kind of uneconomical for a large scale company, the government basically kind of retracted. And the government said that now there is a new deadline. So for this category A, the new deadline is going to be 31st of December 2027. For category B, it is 2028, and for category C, it is 2029. So now those companies who have already installed, they said the other companies have not installed. We have basically made such a huge capital investment. So basically our input cost has increased. Government said, "ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं. What we can do? You charge from the customer." So basically right now, you people are actually paying such increased cost on your electricity. At the same point of time, the same companies are also causing air pollution as well. So government, following the precedent which has been set at the universal stage, has actually taken some very specific and very important steps. First and foremost, what is the precedent? The Stockholm Declaration of 1972, which actually kind of propagated the idea of clean environment. Article 48A, a directive principle of state policy, actually kind of puts a directive on the government to protect the environment. Then as a citizen, we have a duty to protect our environment as well under Article 51A. And the MC Mehta versus Union of India 1988, in this particular judgment, Supreme Court specifically put a polluters pay principle on such polluting companies. So considering the large scale air pollution which was prevailing in the NCR and adjoining region, the government basically established the Commission for Air Quality Management, which is a statutory body under the Commission for Air Quality Management Act 2021, which aims for the prevention of air pollution in the Delhi NCR and the adjoining areas, and it is directly accountable, keep this in mind, to the Parliament. The chairperson is the Secretary to the Ministry of Environment. Also, pollution is measured as per the National Air Quality Index, which has been developed by the Central Pollution Control Board. मेरा एक छोटा सा सवाल है, Central Pollution Control Board is established under which act of the government? Please comment down. So what are the different kind of the pollutants which we actually consider when we are kind of calculating the pollution? Particulate matters 2.5 and 10, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur, carbon monoxide, ammonia, lead, ozone, etc. The other steps which has been taken by the government to actually deal with the concept of air pollution, first and foremost, there is a National Clean Air Program, under which the government is targeting 40% reduction in this particular matter levels by 25-26 under the National Clean Air Program from 2017 level. The cities are going to be covered, that is 102. 131 cities will be ranked on the actions to reduce air pollution. City-specific air pollution abatement action plan will be taken place. And for this initiative, the government has also taken international support from World Bank, Swiss Development Corporations, etc. Then the government is also very significantly focusing upon the electronic vehicles under the Sustainable Alternative Towards Affordable Transport as well as the FAME scheme. The government has also banned the use of pet coke and furnace oil as fuel. Then to actually kind of reduce down the stubble burning, the government has done technological interventions in the form of happy cedar. And even during the time period of the some festivals, let's say Christmas, Diwali, etc., the government has also promoting the green crackers like Swas, Star and Safal. So keep all of these initiatives in your mind when you are actually writing this answer, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to assess that this new initiative of United States of America which India has joined, that is Pax Silica, why does it matter for our country's artificial intelligence and critical mineral dependency? So first and foremost, India on Friday signed the Pax Silica Declaration on the sidelines of the AI Impact Summit in New Delhi, thus formally entering the American-led strategic initiative to counter China's dominance in artificial intelligence as well as technology supply chains, driven by the huge dependency on the semiconductors which forms the backbone of this tablet, of your laptop, of your mobile and all other various kind of technological devices which you guys are using. The Donald Trump's administration had launched this grouping on a specific date of 12th of December, but at that point of time, India was not in the list and thus we are not the founding member of this initiative. So the question which shall arise in your mind is India dependent on various critical minerals which are very important for various industries? The answer is absolutely yes. For example, if it comes to the pharmaceutical and chemicals, we use a mineral called as bismuth, for which the import dependency is approximately 85%. Or for example, we were talking in the last topic about how we are going to promote the electronic vehicles under, let's say, FAME scheme. Even to create those EV batteries and energy storage systems, we require lithium, for which we are 82% import dependent, or silicon, which is actually required for semiconductor and solar panels. So for example, for our Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, we are actually dependent 76% on import for this silicon, or titanium, which is actually required for aerospace and defense application. The import dependency is almost 50%. And when it comes to tellurium, which is actually required for solar power and various kind of thermoelectric devices, the import dependency extends to 42%. What is the economic implication of this import dependency on such critical minerals? First and foremost, the huge trade deficit. So for example, by the July 2025, India's import from our dear neighbor China was approximately $113 billion, while our export was limited to $14.25 billion, and thus we were incurring a deficit of $99 billion in the year of 24-25. And this deficit which we incur from one country, that is China, is actually 35% of our country's total trade imbalance. So you guys are like, okay, what is the problem? Right? China is a very dear neighbor to us. But such creation of critical dependence, just see. Let's say for example, when it comes to our health sector, from where we started our lecture today, if we require antibiotics, 97% of such very important active pharmaceutical ingredient, that is erythromycin, 97% of supply actually comes from China. 86% of your flat panel displays and 80% of your laptops, all of these electronics is nothing but what we are importing from China. In fact, if we are actually going to achieve Panchamre target, where we say that we are going to produce 500 gigawatt of renewable energy, and for that, let's say for example, if you are actually kind of boosting the installation of solar panels under Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, 82% of these solar cells actually come from that. 75% of lithium ion batteries are also imported from China itself. Thus, as per the Global Trade Research Institute, this overwhelming dominance actually gives the Beijing the kind of the potential leverage against India, turning supply chains into a tool of pressure in the times of political tension. Thus, they can actually afford to do a Galwan on us, and even then we can still cannot afford to kind of cut our trade ties with them as we did with Pakistan. Just look at our critical import dependency on them. India's depend on most of the Chinese import for producing even our own export. So the idea of achieving $2 trillion export economy by 2030 by Ministry of Commerce and Industry actually relies on the imports from China. Thus, now in this context, this Pax Silica becomes very important. First and foremost, keep this in mind that it is not a kind of a formal treaty where it has been, kind of devised by United Nations or World Bank or something like that. Rather, it is a US-led initiative to actually counter the China's dominance in critical minerals and semiconductors. Who are the members? The Quad, all the countries of Quad. So USA, Japan, Australia, now India also. Netherlands is there, Singapore is there, South Korea is there. Remember that right now European Union and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development actually act as observers. The major focus is that now these countries are actually going to share such critical mineral resources with each other, will actually help them in identifying such resources, potential reserves, actually mining them, do capital investment in this direction, or development of any such technology which can actually help us to kind of reduce down our dependency on such critical minerals. Thus, this is a strategy which has been termed by the European Union as China plus one to actually diversify our markets from China to secure global technology and artificial intelligence based supply chains. First and foremost, what are the steps which has been taken by USA in this direction? So it basically passed CHIPS Act 2022, where it is basically providing subsidies for the semiconductor manufacturing. It has also put export restrictions on advanced artificial intelligence chip. Then USA has also launched Chip for Alliance framework, which includes USA, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Is India part of Pax Silica? Yes. Is India part of Chips for Alliance framework? No. Also, basically USA follows a strategy called as friend shoring strategy. So let's say for example there is a nation which wants to have a friendly terms with USA. USA says that okay, we are going to provide you a lot of equipments in defense, we are going to do a lot of FDI in your country, we are going to provide you a lot of capital investment, but in return, do you have some very critical reserve of any important mineral? Then please provide us exploration and extraction rights, right? If you are a friendly country, then there is a friend shoring. If you are not a friendly country, then the events which took place in Venezuela, that will take place. Our country has also taken certain initiatives. First is Kabil to actually secure overseas mineral assets, specifically in the lithium triangle countries. Very important for your prelims examination. Please comment down. My suggestion is the lithium triangle basically consists of CAP. So if you want to go to lithium triangle, you need to do a CAP. Just comment down what is the full form of CAP. Then we have also launched Deep Ocean Mission, 6 core components, where we are actually going to use this submersible Matsya 6000, which can actually go up to the depth of 6000 meter. It will actually kind of inculcate deep sea mining system to target cobalt, nickel, copper. Then ocean climate advisory services will be provided. Biodiversity explorations can be done as well as the survey of various kind of hydrothermal sulfides to actually map the mid-ocean reserves. Also, India has launched a national semiconductor mission under the ambit of Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which is a central sector scheme fully funded by the Government of India with a financial outlay of approximately 76,000 crore to actually create various kind of fabrication units in Gujarat as well as in Telangana. Also, the fiscal incentives will be provided to the company up to 50% of the project cost to actually establish a semiconductor fabrication plant, to actually up to 50% of project cost if you are actually establishing a display fabrication unit, or up to 50% of the capital expenditure for ATMP as well as design linked incentive scheme. So keep these provisions in your mind. Also design on the CHIPS Act of 2022, and with this we move forward to the next news, where we are going to quickly learn about the architecture of the Hoysalas. So now when it has come to the newspaper, keep this in your mind. From the art and culture perspective, a very probable question can come from this section. What does the news tells us? It tells us that how across the quiet farmlands of Hassan, Mandya and Mysuru stand some of the Karnataka's most remarkable yet overlooked Hoysala era monuments, temples and basadis or the shrines that once formed the spiritual fabric of a thriving medieval kingdom. built between 11th and 13th century. These shrines actually ends up revealing the dynasty's signature blend of devotion and sculptural mastery, extending far beyond the celebrated sites of Belur, Halebedu and Somanthapura. Halebedu, basically at that point of time, also called as Dwar Samudra, acted as the capital of Hoysalas. Hoysalas, a medieval dynasty which ruled in the contemporary to the Cholas. So they ruled from 1000 to 1336 CE. Keep this in mind that these temples which has been built by the Hoysalas has also been included in the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and they basically are considered or categorized to be fall in the category of Vesara style of architecture. A question shall arise in your mind that, sir, what is this Vesara style of architecture? To understand that, I hope that you guys are already familiar with the styles of Nagada and the Dravid architecture. So in Nagada architecture, there is Garbhagriha. Garbhagriha is the place where the deity is basically residing and sleeping. Just above the Garbhagriha, there is your Shikhar. Shikhar, which basically is a kind of a curvy linear rising just right above the Garbhagriha, and that basically resembles the Meru Parvat of Purans. So for example, if you will read Bhagavad Puran, after the Mahabharata, when the Pandavas were actually going or taking the route to the Swarg, they were basically climbing the Meru Parvat at that point of time. So Meru Parvat has been basically considered in Purans as the kind of the abode of the gods at that point of time. That is why in the Nagada architecture, just right above the Garbhagriha, there is the Shikhar. In the Nagada architecture, all the subsidiary shrines around the major Garbhagriha will also have their own Shikhars, and these are called as Urushringas. But the tallest Shikhar will always be above the Garbhagriha. At the entrance, you can actually see the various river goddesses like Ganga, Yamuna. You can see the the preserver of wealth like Yaksh and Yakshini. Keep this in mind that in the Nagara architecture, there is a general absence of various kind of Vedikas and Toranas, the various kind of railing system and gateways. However, there is a general absence. It does not automatically applies to all the Nagara architecture temples for sure. Then where the Garbhagriha is. So Garbhagriha is basically placed at that point of time at the Jagati platform. So there is Adhisthan platform where the kind of the framework has been set. Above that there is a Jagati platform which basically separates the divinity from the devotee. Above that there is Garbhagriha. In the front of the Garbhagriha you will basically find the Mandapa. However, in the Dravid architecture, the entire temple is actually termed as Mandapa. In Nagara architecture, the Nandi shrine, who is right in the front of the Garbhagriha, right? Basically, Nandi is right in the front of Shivji. Shivji is basically sleeping and Nandi is there within the Mandapa itself. In Dravid architecture, Nandis are basically kept outside the temple. Theek? Then the style of creation here is the Panchayatan style. In Dravid architecture, there is basically a kind of a pyramidal stepped tower which is above the Garbhagriha. Now, the original Vimans which were created, so they were basically short in the height. The later dynasties came, they basically kind of reconstructed those temples. So here in Dravid architecture, there is a less possibility of that the tallest Viman will be over the Garbhagriha itself. Here there is also absence of Uru Shikhar or subsidiary shrines. So subsidiary shrines do not have their specific Vimans. Viman is only right above the Garbhagriha. At the Garbhagriha entrance, in contrast to the Nagara architecture, you will find Dwarpal, Mithun, Navgraha. You will actually find here large Gopurams or gateways. The kunds are actually established within the temple premise itself. So for example, if you will actually go to the Meenakshi temple of Madurai, there is a very beautiful kund which basically exists within the temple itself. The kind of the architecture which prevailed here was your Pancharatha, Triratha, Saptaratha, etc. Now, let's say this Dravidian architecture is being developed by the Palwas of Kachi in the South India, by the kings like Mahendravarman, Narsimhavarman, Rajasimha, right? Narsimhavarman, who will basically build your Pancharatha temple, or Rajasimha, who will basically build your Shore temple. So Dravidian architecture is being built there. Nagara architecture is being developed first under the Gupta period, then under, let's say for example, your Jejaka Bhukti of Chandelas, or the Solankis or Chalukyas, right, who also built your Somnath temple. So in between that there exists a kind of a place where the Uttara Path and Dakshina Path are meeting. So there you can actually see for the first time the development of the Vesara style of architecture in the region of North Karnataka, just south of Satpura range, and that is called as Vesara. first developed under the Chalukya dynasty. So you can recall the rulers like Mangalesha, Pulakeshin II, Loka Mahadevi. They will start creating this Vaisrai style of architecture, where you can also see the curvy linear shikhar as well as the stepped viman, where you can actually see Bhadra or the multiple projections which will start arising from the temple. You can actually see the Pradakshina Path around the Garbhagriha, and here the various kind of sanctums which exist. Learn the terms: Dvikuta, two sanctums; Trikuta, three sanctums; Skuta, various kind of sanctums. So a very specific temple which has been included in the UNESCO World Heritage Site as well from the Hoysalas architecture is the Channakeshwar temple, where these Hoysalas, they actually started using various kind of very smooth chlorite schist and soapstone to actually make such intricate carving possible. Just imagine there are hundred of deities which are actually kind of has been presented residing in their abode in one pillar itself. Why? Because they are using such smooth chlorite schist and soapstone. Developed on the bank of Kaveri river in Karnataka. Majorly a Vaishnavite temple where you can actually see the influence of Alvars. Alvars who had their specific Vaishnavite literature, like for example Nal Ira Divya Prabandham. You can actually see here the star step Jagati platform and a Pradakshina Path which has been provided around the Garbhagriha. You can actually see various kind of Madanika figures which has been carved on the pillars, as well as the Bhumija style of architecture. So just look at the shikhar. What they have done, they have taken a one picture of shikhar and they have painted such various shikhar on the shikhar itself. Various terms like for example Sukhanasi, the nose of Viman; Mandapa, the pillared hall; your Navaranga, the closed hall; Kirti Mukh or the decorative face motif; your Prastar and Kapot Bandha or the superstructure. These are all the important temples which has been mentioned in the today's newspaper. Just have a quick read. Like for example, this very specific Veer Narayan temple forms to the Hoysala architecture which was built in 1200 CE by King Veer Ballal. The temple is renowned for its very expensive Ranga Mandapa temple. So keep all of these facts in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly learn about the concept of freedom of speech and expression and why it has been in the news. If you guys are actually following the general news as well, you guys might be aware about the protest by the 4 Indian Youth Congress workers at the Artificial Intelligence Impact Summit at the Bharat Mandapam, which has transcended the ambit of legitimate dissent and hurt the country's diplomatic image before the foreign stakeholders. And that is the viewpoint which has been held by the Delhi's court, as it remanded the workers to 5 days of police custody. This comes just a day after this, the Indian Youth Congress workers, they were actually arrested for allegedly breaching the security at the venue and raising anti-national slogans according to the police. Does such protest, or let's say for example kind of protesting the the initiatives of the government, does it form the part of freedom of speech and expression? The answer is yes. So you guys can refer to the article 19 which actually provides you the protection of 6 rights: the right to freedom of speech and expression, the right to actually assemble peaceably and without arms, the right to form associations or unions or cooperative societies, or the right to actually move freely throughout the territory, and if you are moving, obviously you can actually have the right to reside and settle in any part of India, and also the right to practice any profession or carry any occupation, trade or business. Similarly, keep this in mind that in S. Rangarajan versus P. Jagjeevan Ram 1989, the Supreme Court specifically held that freedom of expression cannot be suppressed on the account of threat or violence, right? So it is indeed a very important right. The article says that how every citizen has the right to express his views, opinions and beliefs by the word of mouth, writing, printing or in any other matter. Supreme Court in your Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras 1950 has also held that basically this freedom of speech and expression, where you can actually, let's say for example, even if you have a dissent against any policy of the government, you can actually go and criticize the government. Thus, it basically forms a foundation for all the democratic organization. Why? Because democracy is basically the will of the people. And how we will actually know that whether we are adhering to the will of the people? Only if we can actually get to listen to them, right? Thus, the Supreme Court over various such judgments like for example S. Rangarajan or for example Ramesh Thapar has expanded the meaning of freedom of speech and expression to it also includes right to propagate one's view as well as others, the freedom of press, how the government cannot have a monopoly on the electronic media, the freedom of commercial advertisements, the right against phone tapping, or the right to know about the government activities, which actually gave birth to the Right to Information Act of 2005, or even the right to demonstration as it was being done by the Youth Congress worker. But keep this in mind that there are also certain reasonable restrictions which can be applied by the government. First, if you are actually impacting the sovereignty and the integrity of the India. Do our country need a very strong opposition? Yes, indeed, to actually keep the government and the people in the power in the check. But at the same point of time, you need to make sure or you need to decide the ground that at what ground you are going to criticize the government. If it is within the parliament, if it is in the front of the media, the answer is completely yes. But if it is in the front of the people of other nations, then there can be certain restrictions which can be adhered to. So for example, if I have to criticize my brother for some wrongdoing, I would surely do that, but within the ambit of my house and not in the front of some very bad chachi of my neighborhood. Correct? Other restrictions are there: security of state, friendly relations with foreign state, public order, decency or morality, the contempt of court, the defamation which has been applied on Rahul Gandhi. Very recently he is going to the court for this also, and the incitement to an offense. So keep this article very dear to you. A possible question can come on this, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll have a quick look on the concept of International Mother Language Day. Why? Because our Vice President C.P. Radhakrishnan on Saturday actually released the updated version of the Constitution, and now it has also been released in Tamil and the Gujarati language, along with the 8th edition of the legal glossary at the Uparashtrapati Bhavan on the occasion of the International Mother Language Day. What is the backdrop of this? So if you guys can recall that in the Analyst lectures itself, how we have read in utmost detail about the concept of the creation of the Bangladesh, where the people of the East Pakistan at that point of time actually demanded a separation from the West Pakistan. There were various socio-economic causes, like for example the 6-point program which was actually promoted at that point of time by the Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who basically highlighted the kind of the extreme level of poverty which was prevailing in that region. They basically demanded for the power of taxation and the revenue collection in their hand. How at that point of time the East Pakistan was actually providing 70% of the Pakistan's export revenue of jute and tea. However, there were very a limited share of this profit was actually being shared with them. The policy blindness was further showcased by the Bhola cyclone which took place in 1970, which ravaged the East Pakistan at that point of time. However, no humanitarian assistance was provided by West Pakistan. But more importantly, there were also socio-cultural demands, that how the people of East Pakistan actually demanded for the language of Bengali as their lingua franca. However, the West Pakistan government at that point of time was imposing on them under one unit program the imposition of Urdu. And thus a protest took place in the region of Dhaka on a specific date of 21st of February 1952, leading to the the massacre which took place at Shahid Minar in Dhaka, which ultimately fueled the nationalism feeling in the region of the Bangladesh. And thus UNESCO recognized it, and in the year of 1999, 21st February was actually declared as the International Mother Language Day by the UNESCO. The theme for this year is the youth voices on the multilingual education. Is there a provision for such multilingual education in our National Education Policy 2020 as well? And the answer is absolutely yes. The medium of instruction until grade 5 and preferably till grade 8 is going to be mother tongue or regional language, as it was actually highlighted in the Nai Talim policy or the Zakir Hussain report, where Gandhi ji also suggested for the very same thing. The 3-language formula will be adopted, and at least 2 of such 3 language must be native to India. No language will be imposed on any state. And the government is also going to basically ensure the technical education in the vernacular languages also on the very same line. The Raja Ram Mohan Roy, considered to be the maker of modern India, also established a Vedanta school in the year of 1825. So for example, he also played a very pivotal role in the establishment of the Hindu college at that point of time. But the college which he established was Vedanta College, in which he ensured that there is a kind of a technical education which is being provided to Indians at that point of time, which is being borrowed from the West, but in their own regional and mother tongue. Also, under the National Education Policy 2020, there is going to be a creation of Indian Institute of Translation and Interpretation for translation of such technical education to be made available to the various regional languages as well. Try to solve a PYQ and we move forward to the next news, where we will learn about a very important crop, and it falls in the Rabi season and the crop is wheat. First and foremost, why? Because the scientists at Sher-e-Kashmir University of Agriculture, Sciences and Technology in the Kashmir have actually developed two wheat varieties that can actually help the farmers to harvest on time and boost the region's total food grain production. First and foremost, wheat is a Rabi crop which is actually sown in the month of October and December and is actually harvested from the month of April to June, for which purpose they actually require a well-drained loamy and a kind of a medium clay loam soil. The optimum rainfall which actually kind of is required to cultivate the wheat is around 50 to 75 centimeter per annum, where they actually act as a kind of a major source of carbohydrates and gluten protein. Keep this in mind. First, India is the second largest producer when it comes to wheat. However, we do not rank very high when it comes to the export, considering there were a lot of export restrictions on wheat which was applied after the Russia-Ukraine war. So now very recently government has actually cleared the export of 25 lakh ton of wheat, considering there is a huge amount of surplus which is being stored and lying kind of idle in the public distribution system storage of the Food Corporation of India. So who is the largest producer? China. China is the largest producer of wheat in the world, and in our country, Uttar Pradesh is the largest wheat producing state. What are these two varieties? Let's quickly learn about them. First, both varieties are broadly similar to earlier wheat types in agronomic traits and cold tolerance. So they can actually be grown in the cold regions of Kashmir. Kashmir scientists have basically bred two early maturing wheat varieties mindful of the Kashmir's rice wheat cropping calendar, and thus they have produced a high yielding wheat brought from subtropical region which actually used to mature too late in the Kashmir, delaying the transplantation of paddy. The new varieties SW4 and SW3 actually ends up maturing in the early June itself. The new varieties aims to keep the yield competitive while actually prioritizing a timely harvest for farmers. For this purpose, researchers actually used conventional crossbreeding, pedigree selection and multi-sites trial over nearly a decade to develop the varieties. Now listen very carefully. Both varieties actually resist this yellow rust fungal disease which specifically impact the wheat crop and makes the yield reliable quantities of fodder, improving the farmer's ability to manage the risk. Also, very recently there was an article in Hindu which actually talked about that how the climate change is actually going to significantly impact the wheat's production in the future. So for example, if we actually look at the optimum temperature range for wheat, for their germination, root growth, shoot growth, leaf initiation, terminal kind of spikelet, ethnosis, the entire process of the wheat growing, the average temperature ranges around 17 to 25 degrees Celsius. But even in the region of Kashmir, the temperature is actually crossing more than that. So such kind of drought resistant, kind of climate resistant varieties are going to be of paramount use in the future in the context of climate change. Keep this in mind. With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today, and just try to solve the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.